Um, so we're treating these quite abstractly, and we're treating them on more or less equal terms. There's no reason yet given why one of them would be given priority and the others would then have to connect to it or adjust to it or adapt to it. So relate is a more general process. It could include lots of things. So because this is early on in the discussion, and these are very abstract things that we don't have much information about yet.
مفهوم. Yeah.
Okay, so for too long we have held preconceived notions of the market and the state. So we're imagining that these are singular entities and that they kind of are separate somehow from our social and cultural lives. So they're starting off this discussion with a criticism of common sense. So the way that people typically talk about these things, they're saying, is as though there is the market, one thing that sits outside of our lives, and then there is the state. So you're imagining that somehow the kind of economy is separate from us, and also somehow the government and the things that the government controls are separate from us. So they in the next sentence are beginning the process of making this a more complex or challenging this assumption. The debate is ultimately about how these relate to each other. I think that's where they're going. So they're beginning to develop their ideas after they've said our usual way of thinking about these things is wrong. Here's how we should think about them instead. And relate is kind of setting us off on that process. The state is an abstraction. It you're thinking about like the
NSWC.
institutions of government. So the state would include all of the government-controlled education system, the market, the bureaucracy, the police force. That's the state as this kind of it's a way of referring to all of those things as joint. This is like political theory. This is what they're using ideas from political theory,
Yeah.
where they talk about the state
Yeah.
as the and they'll often talk about these two forces in our lives, the state and the market. You know, the government tells us to do one thing, or the state tells us to do one thing. The market might tell us to do the same thing, or it might tell us to do something different. And that's about, what does
So,
money well, it's often treated as though it controls itself, right? It's its own force.
yeah.
And that's the problem. They're saying they talk about the market, they talk about the economy as though it was separate from us, the people who actually form it. And the same with the state. They talk about the state or the government as though it's separate from us.
Yeah. Great.
The,
So,
okay, so the debate about civil society, concern about civil society. So the previous two sentences are focused on this idea of civil society. Again, this is a concept from political theory. It's a concept that helps people to understand, or maybe it doesn't help them to understand, how the different aspects of our society relate to each other. Concern about civil society is not only relevant to Eastern Europe and the developing world, that is then extended, it is very much of interest to the European Union as well. So they're saying this concern is relevant not only to some parts of the world, but also to others. It's not only relevant to places that are developing or
It is a concern of the European Union.
it is a concern also of privileged and powerful countries. So this whole paragraph is really inexplicit about who is doing the thinking and who is doing the recognizing, and where these challenges come from. It's really unclear. So the EU, like other international institutions, has a long way to go in trying to something divergent interests of non-governmental organizations. So it's an international government, the EU. It needs to relate in some way to non-government organizations, and in that context, accommodate makes sense.
So what does it mean, accommodate?
So accommodate in this case means making space for. So it's related to the idea of accommodation, like as a place to live. And it means that the EU has to make space for these, they say, divergent interests. That is, there's actually different groups who have different views on things. Have to be accommodated. They have to have space within the EU. So, and what they're basically saying that the European Union as a government needs to listen to the voices of different kinds of organizations. I think it's, if it were relate would, at this point, relate would be too neutral. Relate how? Adjust would have to be adjusting to the divergent interests. So we would need a different phrasal form there, adjusting to something, whereas you can accommodate other things. So it's about how they're relating. So again, in trying to relate to the frequently divergent interests, you'd need an extra preposition there to form the phrasal verb for either relate or adjust or adapt, whereas accommodate doesn't need that.
So for adjust, what is the preposition?
So you would say has a long way to go in trying to adjust to the frequently divergent interests of NGOs and citizen groups.
Yeah.
And adapt also has to be adapt to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, whereas you can accommodate without needing to accommodate to somebody.
Yeah, and also there is an increasing recognition.
There is, this is one of these, it's an existential verb structure. There is increasing recognition that is a way of saying that somebody is recognizing or is coming to recognize that. So we need a nominalization of a process, and only definition and recognition fit that grammatical category, and only recognition makes sense. That is, there is increasing recognition
So
that
why we cannot?
it would have to be increasing interest in.
Interesting. If you want to use interest, yeah, great.
But it's also a projected clause. There is increasing recognition that international and national governments have to open up to civil society institutions. Whereas if you said if there is increasing interest in the opening up of international and national governments to civil society institutions, again, it's a projected clause afterwards. It's a that clause, so it has to be something that something else, a full clause. You could say there is increasing fun to be had, or fun being had, or we are having more fun, or our level of fun is increasing, but you still have to deal with that clause that comes afterwards.
So we don't have there is increasing fun that is wrong.
No.
Thank you. Yeah.
You can have fun with something.
Yeah, you can have fun with something. Yeah, you're right.
There is
Thanks.
increasing levels of fun with international organizations.
Yeah, his question was we can not use that, whether we can use that or not. So we cannot use that after fun. Thank you.
So I guess recognition, because recognition is a noun that refers to a process, and that process of recognizing, you can recognize that something is the case, whereas you can't have fun that something is the case. You can enjoy that something is the case, actually, but you can't have fun that. Fun is something that kind of comes to you. It doesn't have that further.
Yeah, great.